This is Doormat Mom.
You eliminate all authority to speak when you accuse good parents of not doing enough of this or that to remedy the situation with their ungrateful adult kids.
Good parents fall into the situation of estrangement too. And it's not that they did anything wrong. It's the fault of their narcissistic victimhood mentality kids. If you are giving your ungrateful adult kids more of a runway to treat you poorly than any other person alive, you need to stop that. Were you a really good parent who did the best they could, and yet your child has decided to be an ungrateful little bastard as an adult? I decided not to hang up one of my adult child's stockings this year. Not because I'm mourning the adult child whose behavior resulted in our estrangement. I'm mourning the adult child who I thought she was. The reality is just because kids have been educated on types of abuse doesn't mean they're capable of identifying it in their parents, especially considering the mental health of kids today is the worst it's been in 2 decades. There are a lot of really good parents out there who did everything that they could, and yet their kids are ungrateful little bastards.
Her real name is Laura Wellington, which is not at all hard to find because she really loves linking to her own TED Talk. Now, what's her TED Talk about, you may be wondering? I have absolutely no idea, and I've watched it twice.
I'd meet, and then I'd exceed all of my challenges. And what's interesting is throughout all this crazy and busy, never once did I lack for suitors. Not once. These men would commonly say to me, "You're different." And I'd respond back to them in my head, of course, "I know." Not cocky, just truth.
It seems to be about how lots of men like her because she's not like other girls, because she's better than everyone else, because she's a really successful businesswoman and she has lots of kids and everyone can sense her confidence. But that it's important to have high standards, which, fair enough, that's true. But you know what I hate about TEDx talks? When the person who's presenting, they tell a story, but their story is never about how they learned a valuable lesson or how they overcame an obstacle. It's a story about how they were right all along, and eventually everyone realized they were right all along, and then everything worked out for them because they're the good guy, and that's how it should be. In this particular speech, Laura tells the story of how every man she ever met wanted to date her, but her standards were too high for most duds, which she cheekily pretends is a mispronunciation of dudes.
Is you need to meet you first before you can ever expect to open the door to the right dud. I mean, really, dude.
One day, Laura was at a restaurant when she overheard 2 younger women talking at the bar. Instead of minding her own damn business, she eavesdropped on the entire conversation, which, again, I don't have an issue with. One of my favorite authors of all time, Judy Blume, gives the advice to eavesdrop as much as possible to help you with your dialogue writing skills. But I think it's different when you get involved in the conversation. One woman had just been on a horrible date, and after describing it in explicit, gross detail to the other woman, she wasn't sure if she should see this guy again. Laura, a table over, and mind you, not at all involved in this conversation whatsoever with these strangers, just had to jump in.
I became distracted by 2 women seated at the bar having a very excited conversation. One was telling the other about an extremely bad date she had had recently. My ears began to bleed at what I was hearing. My eyes rolled to the back of my head, and I laughed out loud. That reaction caused these 2 women to turn towards me and draw me into their conversation. And what they got from me over the next hour were needed lessons. Lessons in self-respect.
And because this is Laura's very special TED Talk, these women were immediately receptive to unsolicited advice from a stranger their mom's age. Laura lectured these lazy, unmotivated millennials about why they should never settle for a shitty date, and then, at the end of the conversation, these women were both so enamored with Laura's advice that they told her to write a dating advice book.
What did I get in return? I got gratitude, new friendships, and the suggestion that I write a needed dating book, something I had no intention or interest of doing, mind you, despite how complimented I felt.
Now, we're only getting one side of the story here. I could see this scene playing out in two different ways. This seems to be the way that it played out from Laura's perspective. The date went so bad, but I really liked him at first, and now I'm just not sure if I should see this guy again. Excuse me, ladies. I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. Would you like some advice from a woman who's 30 years older than you? That would be so kind, ma'am. We'd love some advice, as we are merely stupid millennials who don't know how to navigate relationships in this dystopian age of apps and social media, and we envy your generation of women who learned how to fall in love the old-fashioned way. Well, I happen to know a thing or two about dating. And then she talks uninterrupted for like half an hour or so. And then they're like, wow, you're so right, ma'am. You have inspired me to know my own worth as a woman. Until I spoke to you, I had such low self-esteem that I was going to settle for a literal gutter goblin who doesn't wash his ass. But now that you've reminded me to believe in myself, I'm going to wait for a man who writes me poetry. You are such a wealth of knowledge. You should write a book about dating. I'm sure a lot of other women out there need your extremely valuable and niche advice. That's what she wants us to think happened, right? But I could just as easily see the story playing out like this. Excuse me, ladies. I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. Would you like some advice from a woman who's 30 years older than you? What? I heard that you were considering settling for a man who you met on an app and has never sent you poetry, and it got me thinking about how low the standards of today's youth are. So I decided to tell you my entire life story and explain everything I learned about dating along the way. And then she just keeps talking uninterrupted for like another hour while these women just sit there, and then eventually one of the women speaks up and is like, wow, you really like talking about this? Why don't you write a dating advice book? I feel like you need to get all of this out of your head and tell it to someone. Well, I never considered anything like that. That way people can listen to your dating advice, like if they choose to hear it, by opening the book. That might be a healthier approach. This TED Talk is from 4 years ago, and now with Laura's rebranding as Doormat Mom, we can see that little has changed about her approach of always being right. There's one part that doesn't hold up though, when she brags about how successful she was at raising 5 kids.
I'd go on to own a number of businesses, write several books, create an award-winning children's television series, launch a celebrity blog, become a licensed foster parent, and raise now 5 kids to be surgeons, scientists, actors, and athletes.
We're starting off 2025 with something that aged like milk, friends, because Laura has reinvented herself not as Super Mom, but as Doormat Mom, the mom whose claim to fame is that her children don't want to interact with her anymore. She calls herself Doormat Mom ironically because her whole thing is she's not going to be a doormat, she's going to stand up for herself. And who's she going to stand up for herself against? Her own daughter, of course. Much like in her TED Talk, Laura's TikTok stories follow a similar theme. She was right all along. She knows what's best for everybody, and this younger generation of millennials and Zoomers just need to listen to her advice and do what she says, and then we'd all be better off.
It's the fault of their narcissistic victimhood mentality, kids.
She never has anything to learn for herself because Doormat Mom is never wrong. So why am I, Savvy, talking about this? I'm a book review channel. I don't have any kids of my own unless you count the dogs or like the horror movie caliber doll collection over here. And I'm lucky enough to have a great relationship with my own mom, who's always referred to the dogs as her grandkids and loves to have them over to spoil them like a grandma should. And then she's also helping me learn how to make doll clothes. So I'm good on that front. So why did I get invested in the story of Doormat Mom? Why are we here right now? It's because she wrote a book!
Talking about the Doormat Mom No More book, conversation, movement.
And not the dating advice book. She did write that one a long time ago, but that's not what we're going to be reviewing today. She wrote a new book that just came out last month, a book called Doormat Mom No More, all about how her daughter stopped talking to her, and it's not her fault, it's the fault of this younger generation of lazy, entitled young people who don't value their parents anymore.
So if you haven't familiarized yourself with this, and the entire conversation going around Doormat Mom.
She wrote an entire boomer manifesto shit-talking her own daughter, and she doesn't seem to know why her daughter doesn't want anything to do with her. So today, we're gonna discuss that book. And it is the biggest hot mess of crimes against writing that I have encountered in a long time. I couldn't think of a bigger banger to start off this year of book reviews, so let's deep dive into the disaster that is Doormat Mom.
Get you some nuts.
Yeah, you effing.
Up yours, woke moralist. We'll see who cancels who.
Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Savvy and this is Savvy Writes Books. On this channel we do book reviews, media analysis, and video essays, so I hope you guys are having a great start to 2025. There's no sponsor for today's video, so all I'm going to do is ask that you go and follow me on Instagram, and here's why. You may have noticed that I'm wearing a lot of jewelry. I've got all these bracelets. I'm wearing like necklace and these earrings that I made out of repurposed Monster High doll accessories. So I've been making a lot of jewelry lately, and this year I have a couple big YA novel releases coming up, and part of what I'm going to do with that is I'm making some custom jewelry themed after the books, and I'm going to use those as giveaway prizes as promotional things to do with those books. So you could have a chance to win some homemade custom jewelry from me if you follow me on Instagram. I'm going to start that process in February, so get excited for that. Go ahead and give me a follow. So now a quick synopsis of the book Doormat Mom No More. In this book, Laura tells us the gripping tale of how her youngest daughter moved to Australia and met a man that she was planning to marry. Throughout the story, she sprinkles in bits of contempt for her daughter, like talking about how she didn't want to pay for her daughter's ticket to Australia because her daughter never commits to anything. So the fiance asks for Laura's blessing before marrying her daughter, and Laura finds this so charming because young people today should be asking their fiance's parents for their blessing first. Laura gives her blessing even though she's not totally confident that her daughter's going to go through with the marriage, because her daughter, of course, is a piece of millennial hipster trash who wouldn't know commitment if it bit her on the booty cheek. So her daughter starts planning the wedding, and then she decides that for the sake of convenience, she's going to have a ceremony in Australia, and then she'll have another celebration in the US when she and her new husband come back to visit so they can celebrate with all of their American friends and family and people won't have to travel. So she tells Laura that she should come to the US wedding, not the Australian wedding. It seems like she's keeping those celebrations separate, which seems convenient considering Australia is halfway around the world from the US. But Laura gets super offended and claims that her daughter is an ungrateful bastard because she's her mother and she should be invited to the Australia ceremony too. And now that she's not invited, she's revoking her blessing from their marriage. So her daughter is like, okay, mom, fuck this, I'm done with your drama, okay? And I'm gonna have my wedding in Australia. Don't bother coming, I can't deal with this. And then she assumedly cancels the US wedding celebration, and Laura decides to write this book about how much her daughter sucks, and then she proudly announces in the book that she decided to release it during the same week as her daughter's Australian wedding so that her daughter's wedding joy could be clouded by knowing that her mom just published a book about how much she hates her. That is the plot of Doormat Mom No More. Now we can get into the nitty-gritty. I think the biggest surprise about Laura is that this isn't her only book. Like, this woman writes professionally, and that is shocking. You're gonna see what I mean. Here's just a quick example, okay? On the first page of chapter 1, Laura says, I was, literally, beside myself with shock. You were literally beside yourself? That's literally a joke from American Girl's book Meet Kit, which came out in 2000, now a quarter century ago. There's a little vignette illustration in the book where Kit's writing her 1930s Great Depression era newspaper on her typewriter, and she hears her neighbors say that she's feeling literally beside herself, so she draws a picture of that woman being cloned so she can be literally beside herself. I first read that book when I was 8 years old. It came out in 2000. I was the target audience for that joke, and Laura's over here writing a parenting advice book claiming to be literally beside herself, and we're supposed to take that seriously? I know that's kind of a petty nitpick to start off this review with. I know people use the word literally for emphasis nowadays and language evolves along with usage, so we're going to get into some more substantive critiques in a moment, but as we go through these bigger critiques, I want you to keep in mind that Laura Wellington has written and published multiple books, including romance novels, a children's book series, and a book of dating advice. This is far from her only book. When I review books by political influencers or TikTok moms or social media gurus or whatever, people who are famous for something other than their writing, I'm not usually that surprised when their books suck. The book is clearly just a money grab meant to cash in on their audience. But this woman does actually write as part of her career. I cannot get over that. Like, Colleen Hoover looks like Shakespeare next to this woman, okay? Laura has a habit throughout this book of saying in lieu of when she means like in light of or apropos or something like that. For example, when she's talking about the things she said to her daughter when they were first going no contact, she says, I don't say it lightly, especially in lieu of the difficult circumstances. In lieu of means instead of. That's why when you get a funeral announcement, it might say something like, in lieu of flowers, please donate to our family's favorite charities. So this sentence, saying that Laura is making a statement which she doesn't say lightly, she's saying that instead of the difficult circumstances instead of the entire concept of difficult circumstances. No, that doesn't make any sense. She's talking about how the difficult circumstances are context for why she's making such a heavy statement in the first place. So we could rewrite this sentence as, I don't say it lightly, especially considering the difficult circumstances. In lieu of does not work here. On that same page, she says foolproof plan instead of foolproof plan, and that's just hilarious. There's no instruction manual, no foolproof plan that outlines the exact right steps to move you and your family forward. The only situation I can think of where foolproof plan would apply is if the plan was just like, step 1, drink absinthe. I guess that would be a foolproof plan. Who knows, maybe that was Laura's plan before writing this book. That would explain a few things. So shortly after, we get to the thesis of Laura's book, which is this. To put it bluntly, good parents can wind up with adult children who are simply ungrateful, and among the many that do are those who are neither at fault nor let off easy. Yet they are automatically assigned all of the blame for their adult kids' toxic and unrelenting behavior, regardless, simply because society's agenda-driven experts, culture warriors, and those who feed on hate deem it so. I wish I could just squeeze all the bitterness dripping out of that thesis. Squeeze out the bitterness, save it, repurpose it to use as bitters, mix it into my bourbon, make a nice little old-fashioned. Now that's what I call a foolproof plan. There are also a lot of strange writing choices in that paragraph that I think say a lot about Laura's perspective. First, she has a bad habit of hyphenating verbs and their particles. She does this pretty frequently throughout the book. So when you have a phrase like wind up, the word up in that sentence is not functioning as a preposition like the word up normally does. Up can also function as an adverb, which this is kind of adverb adjacent, but basically up is modifying the verb wind. It's not fully functioning as an adverb because adverbs can modify other words or phrases in the sense like they can modify adjectives and the verb phrase as a whole besides the main verb, but when you look at the phrase wind up, it always has to stay like that. The word wind comes before the word up. It is attached in that way as a phrase. When we have a phrase like that, we will call the word up in this situation a particle. They're attached to the verb as part of the phrasing. When you have a verb and a particle, you don't need to hyphenate that. Second, she has a bad habit throughout this book of putting quotation marks around random phrases. Usually if you're using quotation marks, you're, quoting someone, maybe you're writing some dialogue, maybe you're using someone else's quote, or maybe you're using it as a stylistic choice to indicate sarcasm, like if I said Laura Wellington is a quote-unquote professional writer. There will be a lot more examples, many much more egregious than these throughout the book, where Laura just kind of puts quotation marks around random phrases, and I have no idea at all what I'm supposed to take away from it. So finally, we get a lot of passive voice here, and passive voice in writing is not inherently an error. You can be grammatically correct while writing in passive voice. Just because the sentence was written in passive voice doesn't mean it's wrong. See what I did there? But often when a writer is broaching a controversial or emotionally difficult topic, I'll notice them using a lot of passive voice as a way to obscure the subject of the sentence, which is often a way to either take blame off of themselves or to hide the fact that they don't actually have or want to share all of the information about a situation. Think of a phrase like, mistakes were made. Laura then talks about how she started seeing a therapist, which is a good idea, but here's how she describes it. I had recently begun seeing a therapist as I wanted to work on being an empty nester without burdening my adult children or becoming the, quote, cliché, clingy mother. So the phrase work on does not need to be hyphenated. Empty nester doesn't need a hyphen either. Empty is an adjective modifying the noun nester, and you don't need to hyphenate an adjective that comes before a noun. That's just how we write in English by default. I have no idea why she put quotation marks around the word cliché. If anything, it would make more sense to put them around clingy, because then it might imply that clingy was the theoretical piece of dialogue that she never wanted to hear from her kids. I can only imagine that she put the quotes around cliché because she was writing this book in a fit of anger and wanted to get it all out so that she could publish it before her daughter's wedding for maximum pettiness, so she didn't proofread shit. When she and her daughter are in a conflict about her daughter staying in Australia, Laura talks about how during all the fights she kept her cool. She managed to end conversations peacefully, unlike her mean and ungrateful daughter. She says, so I calmly, dare I say, quote, hastily, wound it to a close. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I didn't lash out at her. I love it when not screaming is like the sign of ironclad self-control. You realize you don't have to actually scream at someone to still say something really hurtful to them, right? Also, lash out doesn't need to be hyphenated. It's another verb and particle phrase. Not sure what's going on with the quotation marks around the word hastily. For all these random sets of quotation marks that Laura throws in this book, what's shockingly missing is some actual quotations. Like in this scene, instead of putting quotation marks around hastily, why not use some actual dialogue? Tell us what you said. Tell us what your daughter said. Tell us how you responded. Laura clearly literally has the primal urge to use quotation marks. Her body is telling her that she needs to put some quotes in this book, but she knows she can't directly quote what she said because it'll make her look like an asshole, and then she can't control the narrative. At least that's my suspicion based on how this book is written. Another example of passive voice being grammatically correct. After Laura and her daughter fight, her daughter reaches back out to her because she actually needs some paperwork from her mother to get married in another country, like she needs her birth certificate, that kind of paperwork. So her daughter reaches back out and asks Laura to send her the documents, which, to be fair, she is legally entitled to. Those are her documents. Here's what Laura says. She needed my help in accessing particular paperwork in order to legally tie the knot. Her vagabond lifestyle, coupled with her decision to marry and take up residence in Australia, required me to lift a finger on her behalf. First, tie the knot doesn't need to be hyphenated. That's just like a regular verb and a noun that's an object of the verb. Again, that's just the normal way we write in English. Second, take up doesn't need to be hyphenated. It's the same verb and particle phrasing that we've been discussing. Third, how selfish do you have to be to complain about lifting a finger on her behalf? How pretentious do you have to be to refer to your daughter's love of travel as a vagabond lifestyle? See what we're doing right here, right now with this video? We are critiquing both the content of the book and the writing itself. This is called a developmental edit, and it's usually a writer's first step before they revise the book. Then proofreading comes after that. But Laura did none of these steps. She did zero editing on this. This book is not only infuriating, it is borderline unreadable. Then Laura talks about how she paid for her daughter's college education, and she uses this as an example of something her daughter should be grateful for. And hey, I agree. Paying for someone's college education is a huge expense. Most parents aren't able to do it without their kids getting some sort of loan or some financial aid, so it absolutely makes sense to be grateful if someone's able to do a huge gesture for you like that. But Laura doesn't seem to understand that gratitude doesn't equal a free pass to then do whatever she wants for the rest of her life. Her daughter may very well be grateful for the fact that Laura paid for her college, but that gratitude doesn't mean that when Laura starts fights with her about her wedding planning or calls her judgmental names that doesn't still hurt. You can't use paying for something for someone as a reason why they're forever indebted to you, or else that's not really a gift, that's like a loan at best and a bribe at worst. Of her relationship with her daughter, Laura says, there were ups and downs over the years for sure, but primarily I thought we'd had an, quote, honest, cohesive relationship overall. Lots of unnecessary commas and hyphens here, as usual, but what I can't get over is why she put honest, cohesive in quotation marks. It makes it sound insincere. Like, imagine if you're passing a restaurant and it says, quote, authentic American food. Now you're questioning if it's really authentic, right? Why put that in quotes? Or even worse, imagine it says authentic American, quote, food. You put food in quotes, you know that place is going to get shut down for E. coli in like a month. So what does it mean when she puts honest, cohesive in quotes? It just makes everything look sus. So after Laura's daughter moves to Australia, she wants to attend law school and she asks her mom to help with the tuition by loaning her some money. This time Laura says no, and that's perfectly reasonable. She's well within her right to do that. You owe your kids love. You don't owe them non-stop, never-ending financial support for whatever they want to do once they're full adults. Nobody is required to pay for law school. I agree with this. However, there's never really a part in this book where Laura's daughter gets mad at her for this. It sounds like the scene basically went like this. Hey mom, I'm thinking about going to law school. Would you be in the position of being able to loan me some money to get started? No. Okay, no problem, I'll figure it out. With how bitter Laura is toward her daughter, you'd think that if the daughter had said anything indicating she thought she was entitled to that money in any way, Laura would have been all over that. But since nothing bad happens when Laura says no, we can only assume that the daughter was fine with it, and this is yet another unnecessary anecdote just meant to make her daughter look greedy and ungrateful. I need to just read the next page to you in full because of how incredibly unhinged it is. So for context, Laura has just given her daughter's fiance her blessing to marry her. Because Laura's husband, who's this daughter's father, he died a long time ago from cancer, which is extremely sad. I really feel for everyone in this family who had to go through that. Even Laura, especially Laura. She might be a really mean person, but having to raise your kids alone while mourning the death of your partner, that's one of the worst things I can imagine. I don't wish that situation on anybody. But where I'm going with this is, so Laura's a very traditional kind of person, okay? She talks a lot about Christianity and the Bible throughout the book, which again is not a problem. I have a lot of people close to me who really love Jesus, who lean on the lessons from the Bible to get through the tough times in their life. I respect that. What I don't respect is when you use religious culture, whether that's Christianity or any other religion, when you use your religion as a way to pressure other people into behaving the way that you want them to. You'll see what I mean as we get further along. So for example, Laura is leaning on this old heteronormative tradition of the man asks the woman for her hand in marriage, but first must seek her father's blessing, but since the father in this situation has died, the fiance asks Laura's blessing instead, which she finds very sweet because you need to ask someone's blessing. The parents have to give their official approval of the marriage. Again, if that's a tradition that you enjoy following, if you find that emotionally valuable in your own relationship, power to you. I can definitely see why that might feel like a big moment that, oh, this family, I'm getting the official approval from the family, I'm going to join this family, they love and accept me. I can see the joy in that, but I don't see why this is just a necessary part of the process. It's very sexist too. Like, her daughter's fiance has to ask for her parents' blessing, but the daughter never has to ask her future husband's parents for their blessing. It only goes one way. So anyway, Laura gives the blessing, and she and her daughter are still on shaky ground for reasons that Laura doesn't specify. The book then says this: "Little did I realize that this would be the, quote, beginning of the end, ... to our relationship, as well as any hope of me seeing them in Australia, shortly. I don't think he even knew the plan at the time. He'd soon find out, I suspect, just like me. In detailing our pleasant exchange to my daughter, she'd soon learn of my intention to join them down under for their nuptials too. I'm surprised that I didn't feel her absolute dread from my porch swing in Connecticut when she did. The sudden news ultimately led to the first of two rather touchy conversations between us, the likes of which I'd never forget. Absolutely never. What mother could, after being told by her adult child that she isn't wanted? So don't show up." So we never get any further context than that. There are going to be a couple scenes later on when Laura refers vaguely to some specific arguments that she had with her daughter. They're equally unhinged and we'll get there, but here she doesn't tell us anything about what her daughter's actual complaints were. Passive voice is doing so much work in this sentence. What mother could, after being told by her adult child that she isn't wanted? By using passive voice, Laura is putting the focus on herself. It's not "my daughter told me I don't want you." If she'd phrase it that way, readers would naturally have more questions like, well, how did your daughter say it exactly? Your daughter's the subject taking agency in this sentence, so I want to know how she phrased it or what her reasons might be. It would draw more attention to the lack of dialogue and specificity in Laura's writing. Instead, she flips the sentence around to make herself the subject. She was told by her daughter that she wasn't wanted. Now things are so fuzzily filtered through Laura's perspective that a casual reader might just by default sympathize with her, when in reality, this scene should make readers question everything she's saying. We then learn one of the things that Laura and her daughter fought about, and it's so extremely stupid I'm going to explode. Laura recalls her daughter's first Christmas in Australia. Basically, Laura tells her daughter that she can't afford to pay for all her flights back and forth between the two countries, and Laura's daughter can't pay for it all on her own, so she tells her mom that she'll have to remain in Australia for Christmas this year, valid considering she lives there. Laura is sad, of course, but according to her own recollection, she doesn't make too big of a deal of it. After Christmas, Laura asks her daughter how the holiday went in Australia, and Laura's daughter tells her all about it. She tells her how welcoming her fiance's family was, how nicely they decorated for Christmas, how much food they made, how they celebrated. Basically, she had a great Christmas. Now, if I were telling my mom this story, she'd probably be so relieved that my first Christmas away from home went so well. She'd probably be happy that I had such a nice time and that I was marrying into such a welcoming family. But this is Doormat Mom, remember. From Laura's own retelling of the story, her daughter never says anything negative about Christmas. She never compares her new in-laws' Christmas celebrations to the ones Laura herself hosted. All she did was express excitement about what a nice time she had. But of course, Laura has to take this personally. The tale made me very happy, but it also left me somewhat perplexed. Something about my daughter's seemingly dramatic response didn't add up. It was just too extreme. In light of all that I knew about our own holidays over the years, especially Christmas, the magnitude of her reaction as described to me resembled that of someone who hadn't been so lovingly or generously cared for, in my opinion. I couldn't make sense of it, and even attempted to place the onus on my bewilderment on my jealousy, mine perhaps, especially knowing that my daughter had foregone a Christmas with her own family to remain in Australia with him and his. She had conveyed to me at the time that as a result of me no longer agreeing to pay for her flights home, she'd stay put. She stated that it wasn't worth coming home when she had to come back again in a year for her sister's wedding. She'd rather use her funds to remain solo traveling instead. Yeah, Laura, you were right to tell yourself to calm down there, but now Laura is using this story as an example of things going south with her daughter. How? Literally nothing bad happened, once again. I guess she expected her daughter to be so sad that her mom wasn't there that she couldn't even enjoy Christmas at all, and the fact that she enjoyed Christmas without her mom one time means that her daughter must be an ungrateful bastard who's incapable of feeling love. Laura's daughter couldn't afford a flight home for Christmas, and she knew she'd have to pay to fly halfway around the world again for her sister's wedding the following year, so she decided to stay where she was and save money. And the next page makes the story make even less sense. This saddened me for a number of reasons, including her choice to forego holding in her arms her firstborn niece who would be arriving in February. I don't know if you know this, Laura, but Christmas is not in February. Your daughter couldn't make it home for Christmas because she was saving money to fly out for her sister's wedding the following year. And you're mad because if she doesn't also pay to fly out for Christmas, she won't be able to meet her newborn niece who's going to be born 2 months after Christmas. Even if she did come home for Christmas, she still wouldn't have been able to hold her niece because her niece wasn't born yet by Christmas. Did she expect her to come visit for Christmas and then pay for another flight to come out again in February? Did she expect her daughter to visit for Christmas and then stay in the US for 2 whole months away from her home, her fiance, her job, and her obligations? I don't understand what Laura even wanted in this situation. The timeline is so fucked, I can't even understand what the ideal situation would be that would make Laura happy in this situation. So then it's time for the daughter to plan her wedding. We get this page, which is a lot to unpack, so we're gonna read it. Her future fiance had told her about his and my conversation, and in that, the part where I noted that I would be showing up in Australia for their nuptials. Knowing that I would be hosting a second gathering to celebrate the happy event at home as well, she had not anticipated me attending the ceremony there too. A 3-step marital plan in place, at least 2 of those plans would include family and friends. I concluded that even if her wedding ceremony bumped up against the head of another one of my children's weddings now, I wouldn't miss it for anything. I vowed to figure it out. That said, it began to appear to me, however, that there might not be anything to figure out. As the conversation unfolded, it led me to conclude that she didn't want me in Australia among the other guests. She danced around the truth to begin with, using several well-crafted reasons to dissuade me from coming, all of which could be construed as sheer thoughtfulness on her part, but when my responses did not go as planned, she told me flat out that she needed to do further thinking on the matter, then blatantly said we had time. The fact that you're being so vague really makes me think you're hiding something. For example, what exactly do you mean by, as the conversation unfolded, it led me to conclude that she didn't want me in Australia? What specifically unfolded during that conversation? What led you to conclude that she didn't want you there? Did she say, I don't want you there? Did she say something else that has different interpretations based on context? Did she give any reasons? Laura then continues to not tell us what happened. She danced around the truth to begin with, using several well-crafted reasons to dissuade me from coming. Your daughter's not the only one dancing around the truth here, Laura. I read your whole ass book solely about the process of your daughter uninviting you from her wedding, and I still don't know what her reason was, despite you claiming that you told me. What were the well-crafted reasons? What did she actually say? Also, you don't need a hyphen between well and crafted. Crafted is an adjective describing reasons, the noun. Well is an adverb, and adverbs describe adjectives by nature. However, a lot of people tend to hyphenate phrases like well-crafted, and again, language evolves with usage, so I'm gonna let that one slide because that's a mistake that's so common it's bordering on more of a colloquialism. One of Laura's most infamous TikToks is this one, about how if your adult child cuts you off, you should still go to their kids' events because you're entitled to do that as a grandparent.
If you are a loving grandparent and your estranged adult kids refuse to allow you to see your grandkids, whether it be at the holidays or always, then you find out that those kids are going to be in a Christmas concert and you're local, don't not show up. Sit in the back if you have to, but take in the joy that comes from watching them perform.
When I heard this, my first thought was, okay, why might someone not want their parents showing up at their kids' events? And I thought, well, maybe the parent isn't vaccinated and they're worrying about exposing their young children to potential diseases. That's an example that I've heard used a lot before with a lot of friends who have kids. And so then I thought about how Laura's daughter didn't want her mom coming to Australia, even though she was totally fine to celebrate her wedding with her in the US. And I was thinking also about how Australia often had a lot stricter COVID restrictions than the US during a lot of the worst parts of the pandemic. And then I wondered, is Laura an anti-vaxxer? Is that the piece of the puzzle that's been missing throughout this story? The answer will not shock you.
Against the advice of Dr. Fauci, CDC, all the pressure, you decided not to get vaccinated. Why?
I didn't have enough information about it to make me feel comfortable.
All I had to do was Google Laura Wellington vaccine, and wow, there it was, the missing reasons right there before my eyes.
Did your family make a different decision?
Unfortunately, they did, and it broke my heart that they did. I thought I had instilled a bit more reticence in them when it came to their maintaining their health, to be vigilant in that. And it's very hard as a parent when you spend 18 plus years protecting them, to watch them make a decision that could not only alter their lives, but your own.
That's right, Laura doesn't take vaccines, and she doesn't respect her children's decision to take vaccines because she might be affected by having to be sad on the extremely small off chance that the vaccine makes them sick. No wonder your kids don't want you traveling around the world to see them and meeting an entire group of friends and relatives who thus far has been safe from your unvaccinated ass. And not only does Laura not take vaccines, which is technically her right even if I don't approve of it, she also created an entire startup app. She invented anti-vax Grinder.
The founder of Zneex, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, app, a new friendship relationship app that connects users according to vaccine preferences. Let me get the right name of that app. How do you pronounce it?
It's called Zneex.
Quick little detour to talk about this. Back in December of 2022, Brains magazine, that's Brains with a Z, ran an exclusive interview with Laura Wellington about her new app. The app is called Zneex. Zneex, which to me sounds and looks like a combination of sneeze and Kleenex, which I guess makes it a perfect name for an anti-vaxxer app. Here's how she describes it. My newest venture is an app called Zneex. Zneex is a friendship and dating app that brings together new friends and lovers based upon individually preferred vaccination statuses. What this means is that unvaccinated users who only want to meet other unvaccinated users for the purposes of friendship and especially dating can do so through the Zneex app. And we know this is really Laura talking because here's how she writes about her app. Users can elect to sign up for the free basic membership or the monthly premium membership. Sign up doesn't need to be hyphenated, Laura. It's a verb and a particle! And the icing on the cake? If I were Laura writing the script right now, I'd either put icing on the cake in quotes or I'd hyphenate every word of it. And the quote, icing hyphen on hyphen the hyphen cake, unquote. One of her children's books that she wrote is about, I'm not kidding, how fun it is to have the flu. It's called Jasper's Giant Imagination, I'm sick. And here's how she describes it on the Amazon product listing. See how Jasper's Giant Imagination brings laughter and fun to catching the flu bug. You'll be delighted and amazed, and maybe even want to catch the flu bug too. I can't make this shit up. If I wrote Laura as a fictional character in a book, I'd have people reviewing it being like, the anti-vax mom character was sufficiently annoying, but she seemed to be like a little too much of a stereotype. The part where she wrote a book about how getting the flu is actually fun and delightful, that pushed my suspension of disbelief just a little too far. Yet it's real. Laura J. Wellington, Doormat Mom, is a real person. She's such a parody character of herself that I wanted to have one of my dolls play her, but I don't currently have any dolls with her hairstyle. If she keeps this bullshit up and I have to talk about her again, I'm gonna make one. Okay? So now we can keep that in mind as we move forward in this book. Laura never once hints at what her daughter's reason might be for not wanting her to come to Australia for that ceremony. From Laura's perspective, her daughter just says mean things to her with no motivation and no end goal in mind, and Laura is always the victim. If you're so proud of not taking vaccines that you will go on TV and talk about it, that you will literally start an app to connect anti-vaxxers with each other, why didn't you bother to mention it in this book that has more holes than Swiss cheese? So anyway, back to the story of Laura's daughter's wedding. After Laura starts to feel unwelcome at the Australian ceremony, whether because her daughter specifically told her not to show up or because she said something else, Laura's not a clear enough writer for me to even still know what happened, Laura gets mad and sends a long wall of text to the fiance telling him that she revokes her blessing. She tells the fiance like she knows they're gonna get married anyway, but she can no longer, in good faith, give a blessing because the blessing was contingent on being invited to Australia, I guess. The fiance responds by blocking Laura, and the way Laura describes it is just the funniest misuse of quotation marks in this entire book. I took his quote-unquote blocking of me as a sign of their displeasure with my decision. You think? I love how blocking of me is in quotes, his quote-unquote blocking of me. What? Laura then talks about where some of her daughter's emotional problems might come from, and she concludes that maybe losing her father at a young age to cancer was a cause, which is true. Again, I feel horrible that Laura and her kids all had to endure this tragedy, especially when the kids were still so young. But the way Laura writes about it, especially knowing that she had battled with, quote, not knowing her father for a period of time in her mid-teens. Why is not knowing her father in quotes? Imagine this taking place in therapy. So Laura, today you wanted to talk about where your daughter's emotional distance might come from. Yeah, I think it might stem from her struggling with, not knowing her father. Do you mean that literally? Or, yeah, she lost her father at a young age, so she had to struggle with, quote unquote, not knowing her father. Why do you write like this, Laura? Laura then spends a bunch of the book throwing Bible verses at us, especially the ones about how children are supposed to always obey their parents no matter what. And then she concludes that the reason that so many kids are so mean nowadays is that the devil has possessed them. She says, in other words, stay close to your kids before the devil steals them away. I guess the devil lives in Australia. That would be why they call it Down Under, because I guess it's hell. It's also really hot there from what I've heard, so that checks out. Satan lives in Australia. Then she talks about how the bond between parent and child is biologically wired into our DNA, and no other bond has the same biological connection as the one between parent and child, which I found kind of upsetting because my dad adopted me when I was a kid, and my connection with my dad, who's an adoptive father, is not any weaker for lack of genetic relation. My biological father is a violent piece of shit who couldn't wait to sever our sacred DNA bond if it meant he could stop paying child support, so I don't think Laura actually knows shit about DNA. Then Laura goes into the nature versus nurture debate. She talks about how kids aren't really blank slates when they're born, and she knows this because some of her kids do still talk to her, and she raised them all exactly the same, so her daughter in Australia must just be genetically bad, like she must have just been born with some kind of birth defect that made her an asshole, I guess. Then she goes on a typical boomer rant about how kids today claim their parents are abusive even if they did nothing wrong, and how that takes away from real abuse victims. She never explains how much abuse you have to endure to be considered a real victim, just that what she did wasn't real abuse, of course, and she knows this because she's a good person and therefore could never be a bad person. She refers to herself as a good parent throughout this book, and because she's a good parent, that means that she's the good guy and can't be the bad guy. We then get only one other concrete story of a conflict between Laura and her daughter, which once again makes no sense. My youngest daughter sent me photos of a few wedding dresses that she chose to try on during a stop in her travels. I thought that the designs she opted for were a bit too revealing, thinking that her two brothers, as well as her fiance's parents and brothers, would be in attendance on the day. As her choices challenged my personal comfort level, I felt that it would be even worse for those noted above. So I told her and explained my reasoning behind it as sensitively as possible. It was my opinion, the same one that I thought she'd been asking for. I can attest to the fact that my words were not well received. Everyone say it with me. We're going to say this together. Try on doesn't need to be hyphenated. If you're trying on a wedding dress, it would sound insane if you said, this dress on which I tried, because try on is a phrase on its own, because it's what? Say it with me, class. A verb and a particle. Next, I have absolutely no idea why she chose to hyphenate comfort level and well received, but those don't need hyphens either. Laura just enjoys throwing hyphens between random words. Well received doesn't need a hyphen because it doesn't need to be combined at all. Received is the passive participle form of the verb receive, and well is an adverb, which can already modify verbs on its own. Again, that's naturally how we write in English. Comfort level is a noun and adjunct phrase. Level is the noun, and comfort is another noun, which when a noun modifies another noun, we call that a noun adjunct, because comfort is functioning as a noun modifier, but comfort on its own is not an adjective. A similar example would be like if I said, I'm a dog person. Dog is modifying person, even if both are nouns. But if I hyphenated dog person, you might think that I'm secretly alluding to being a werewolf or something. Got it? Hope we're taking notes, class. I'm teaching a lot more grammar than I expected today. Now that that's all out of the way, what the actual fuck was the story, Laura? Your daughter sent you some wedding dress photos, probably assuming that you, her loving and supportive mother, would tell her which ones you like best and give her some feedback. Maybe you'd say, oh, I think the square neckline and floor-length skirt looks nice, but I'm not sure about the shape on this part. I think this works for me. Or maybe this fabric complements your skin tone and the shape of this dress looks great on you, but I like the length of this one better. Or maybe my favorite was this one because you look so pretty in it. Instead, Laura told her daughter, no, all these dresses make you look like a slut, and you can't dress promiscuously when your brothers are going to be there. You don't want to fill your brothers' minds with lust at your own wedding, do you? Yes, Laura, she asked you for your opinion. On the dresses, on what styles you thought looked best. No reasonable person would expect their mother to respond by saying, those dresses are too sexy to wear in front of your brothers. She sent you those dresses because she liked them. This is the style that she wants to wear. She was looking for feedback, not for you to tell her that all of them are bad because she looks like a hoe, okay? A few times, Laura tries to bring scientific evidence into her book to back up why it's okay for her to be mean and bitter, but she also sucks at that. Mass formation psychosis is not a recognized psychiatric term to describe delusional groupthink. However, it is a cultural term being used to describe it, today. And there is a lot of it going around, I must say, including with regards to this issue. In the case of adult kids, it seems that society has deluded them into thinking that they are allowed to have their feelings and express them, but good parents are not. No matter how many buttons these adult kids push, good parents' emotions and actions should remain in check. After all, they're the parents, right? Right. However, wrong comes into play when good parents are expected to rise to the stature of Jesus after being pushed well beyond what any human being can endure simply because society says so, then labels you a bad parent when you don't. It's a type of rationale devoid of any reality, remarkably devious and immensely destructive. I love that she starts off this section by admitting that the phenomenon she's discussing is not a recognized psychological concept, but she believes it's true anyway. It's kind of like the anti-vax stuff. That's all very fitting. Also, we don't need to hyphenate in check, we don't need to hyphenate well beyond, and we don't need to hyphenate says so. I have no idea why she did. Then she talks about some of the parents in her Facebook group, which is also called Doormat Mom No More. This is a Facebook group with a couple thousand members where parents can join to vent about the fact that their kids don't talk to them anymore and complain about how they did nothing wrong and their kids are always the problem. For example, she says, one mom shared just how challenging figuring out her adult child's why has been. She said, I don't even think she knows why herself, because it always keeps changing. I'm tired of asking always to come up with a different answer. It's attention-seeking and very manipulative. I've had enough. Part of me believes Laura herself actually wrote this quote, not a woman in her group, solely because I don't believe another person would also choose to hyphenate come up in that context. But besides that, imagine being that mom, okay? Your child has grown up and doesn't want anything to do with you anymore. You ask why. Your child gives you a reason. Instead of, maybe believing them, taking their reasons seriously, opening up a discussion about that, working on your conflict resolution together, you refuse to believe her because sometimes when you ask, there's a different reason. Has this woman never considered that maybe there are multiple reasons? No matter what Laura says, people don't make the choice to cut off family members lightly. I know very few people who have done that. I could count them on one hand and it's not even close. And every single time it's been a long-term struggle of trying to resolve the conflicts with their family for years, only giving up after therapy and constant attempts to fix it. It's not surprising to me that someone who did something as extreme as cutting off their mother had multiple different reasons to do that. People don't usually go no contact with a beloved family member after just one infraction. Contrary to Laura's belief, most people do want to work things out and maintain relationships in their lives even if they're not perfect. Most people are capable of forgiving other people's mistakes. I would have been more surprised if this child had only one reason. Of course there are many different examples of things going wrong. What? Then she goes on to talk about how kids today all love to make up mental illnesses and that they make these up, they don't really have them, and they make them up just to use them as an excuse to be mean to their parents. And then she concludes that the only true mental illness is not having Jesus in your life, and that if these kids would just read the Bible and follow their commands to obey their parents, that their brains would be magically cured. This video is starting to get a bit too long for such an unreadable piece of garbage book, but I do have one more thing we need to discuss before we wrap up. We're gonna end it on this. It's this line from Laura towards the end of the book. She's talking about how it's important for people to heal from trauma, and that parents need time to heal too. And that's true. I agree. Here's what she says. Good parents are no exception, especially when particular children who held their hearts in their hands, squoze it to death and killed them too. And the reason that I bring that up is that I have never once before in my life seen someone use the word squoze, whether in writing or out loud. I looked it up, okay? Apparently squoze is a recognized informal past tense of squeeze. Like, instead of saying squeezed, some people say squoze, I guess. If you're someone who says squoze, we can still be friends. I'm not trying to insult you, but squoze? Really, Laura? Squoze? Anyway, do not read Doormat Mom No More. If any of Laura's other books are like this, I would caution you against them as well, especially the children's book about how getting the flu is a fun and delightful adventure, written by a woman who doesn't believe in vaccines. I've got a lot more book reviews loaded up in the chamber for you guys, so don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you're new here and you like what you see. I'm getting so close to 100,000 subscribers, which is really exciting. I really can't wait to hit that milestone. So if any of you guys have any idea of like what a special video I should make to celebrate that milestone should be, let me know. I'm I'm open to suggestions. Right now, I'm thinking of finally reviewing the book After by Anna Todd, the strange Harry Styles fan fiction that became a novel and then a Netflix movie. So I'm considering that, but if you have other ideas, please let me know. Thank you for watching my first video of 2025. I hope you all are having a lovely start to your new year. I'll see you all next week for more videos, but in the meantime, stay squoze. Bye.
Get you some nuts.
Yeah, you effing.
Up yours, woke moralist. We'll see who cancels who.